Hi, this is Hector Burciaga with BIM Coach. In this video, we'll cover the procedure for creating custom mappings to Navisworks objects. While working with Navisworks and specifically with Quantification Workbook, you may find yourself in situations where the default mapping options don't always apply to your project necessities. One clear example of this would be when taking off rebar in a project. You may say it's not very common to use rebar in Revit. However, if you do run into the case and you need to take off that rebar in your project, you will need to follow this procedure so that you can set up your Navisworks to take off those quantities. First thing we need to take into consideration is how we export our NWC from Revit. So let's jump into the Revit model. When we're in the Revit model, we must make sure that we take one thing into consideration for this mapping to work. I will open my Project Units window. When I do so, I will go to Discipline and open Structure. Under Structure, I will navigate down to Reinforcement Length, and I will click on its format. I must make sure, whatever my units are, that I do not have a unit symbol at the end. This is true to any type of unit that you want to take off in Navisworks. What happens is that Navisworks mapping works through the use of properties and parameters. So if a parameter has a unit symbol at the end, it may lose its ability to be taken off. So once I make sure my unit symbol is set to none and I have exported this, I can now open this file in my Navisworks environment. Back in Navisworks, I will go ahead and create a quantification workbook. And as I can see, I do not have any items, so I must open my item catalog. I will go ahead and create one simple item just to do a test, and I will call this rebar. As I can see, I have length is equal to model length, and its units are set to meters. Same thing with width, thickness, height, perimeter, area is set to square meters, volume is set to cubic meters, weight is set to kilogram, count is set to each. And under primary quantity, I can define a quantity or a formula of a quantity, taking any of these variables into consideration. We'll use this primary quantity field further on in this lesson. So as I can see, my units are pretty much set to what I need. So I'll go ahead and click on Quantification Workbook, and I can see that now I have rebar. If I go into my model and I select one of my rebar objects, I will see that it's really 15 objects in one. So if I go to its properties and under element, I can see it has a total bar length property. This says it has 181.33 meters. Now, if I go into my quantification workbook, select my rebar item, right-click and take off selected model items, I will see that I have an object called rebar bar. However, it has no model length or no value whatsoever on its properties. So there is a workaround for this, and in order for us to fix this, we must go into the guts of Navisworks and modify the Takeoff property maps file. So I'll go ahead and just delete this Takeoff, and we'll navigate to the C Program Files Autodesk Navisworks Manage 2014 Quantification Takeoff Maps folder, and here we will open the Takeoff property map.xml file. I would recommend you keep a copy of this file just as backup, just in case you want to restore the original settings of Navisworks mapping. So I'll go ahead and right click and I'll go ahead and open this with a notepad. You can use any standard web editing software to edit this XML file. Now, it is important that you are somewhat familiar with XML structure. This way, you can facilitate a lot of the work that you're going to do with editing this file. So, when working with our Takeoff property map file, we must understand that this is what directs Navisworks to mapping specific properties. Now, if we scroll down, we will see that we have a particular Takeoff property map called Length Map 1, and there are several of these maps. These will all tell Navisworks, depending on specific parameters, where to look up certain properties. And in this case, it's telling it to look up length. So, in order for us to properly create a Takeoff property map, we must first create a sample XML file of the property that we want to take off. So in order to do that, we must go back into Navisworks and use the Find Items window. When I open it, I will go into Category, and I will set it at Element, Property. Let's make this a little bit wider. At Property, I will look for Total Bar Length. And for condition, I'll just go ahead and leave it as defined. What's the idea behind this? What I'm trying to do is export this property as an XML file so I can copy it and paste it into my property mapping file. So let's just go ahead and hit export. This will tell me to save it and name that file. I'll just go ahead and save it as is. And that too, I will open it as or with a notepad. And as I can see, I have my notepad with the XML properties of that specific parameter. So I want to copy everything from conditions all the way down to this conditions container at the bottom. I'll go ahead and copy it. I'll jump into my other notepad and I'll go all the way down to the last length map. I can overwrite any of this, which is not really recommended. So what I'll do is just create a new Takeoff property map. I'll skip a few spaces in there. I can delete them later. Paste my conditions. I'll copy one of these original. Paste it there as well. And what I'll do here is rename the length map 5 because I can't have two of them. And I will go ahead and name it rebar length. Under type of property, I must make sure that I have model length activated. Now, what I'm going to do is overwrite this part of the XML file with the conditions that I had already copied. I'll copy it from condition test all the way down to this condition here. So I'll go ahead and cut this out and I will paste it right about here. Now I can delete this text and we're all set. One last thing, I have to set the data type to linear and just put a 0 in between here. Now that this is set, I can simply save it, close it, and I will need to restart Navisworks, so I must close it. So I will navigate back to my file. And in my quantification workbook, I must make sure I have no takeoffs. So I will go ahead and select my rebar once again, back into my quantification workbook, and just do a sample Takeoff selected model items. And as we can see, model length is now populated with data. I'll go ahead and delete this Takeoff. And I'm going to take this exercise a bit further. Let's suppose that I want to use the model length and multiply it by its weight per meter depending on its diameter. Now for this I will need to consult some information from my supplier as to the weight of my rebar per meter so that I can add that into the formulas of my primary quantity. So the first thing I'm going to do is open my resource catalog. I will create a new resource. Now I can be more organized with this and create a new group, but just for the sake of the exercise, I'm going to create one simple resource and call it number 4 rebar. Now that I have number 4 rebar under primary quantity, I will type in is equal to length times 0.994 and press enter. Now under units, I'll just go ahead and set this to kilogram. Now I will go back to my item catalog and select my rebar item and select use resource, and I'll select use existing master resource, and I'll select my number 4 rebar resource and hit done when I'm completed. So as we can see, my rebar is an item and I have a resource under it called number 4 rebar. I can now use one of my selection sets and I can select all of my rebar, go into my quantification workbook, select my rebar item, and do a model takeoff to selected catalog item. As we can see, all that information is now populated in this takeoff. I have a total length of 3,450.67 meters on my rebar length. And if I look at my resource, this will now give me a primary quantity of 3,429.996 kilograms. So this is already taken into consideration, that resource and that formula that I added for this takeoff. So as we can see, we have now personalized the way Navisworks is mapping length so that we can harness the power of model takeoffs with rebar, which is not natively supported. So with this procedure, we told Navisworks how to define the rebar length, and we additionally, through the use of a resource, calculated the total weight of that rebar in this project. Now I must say that it is not necessary that you use a resource for that. You can also add that formula to the primary quantity of your item. This is just an example. You will need to define what works best for you in your workflow. And this concludes this tutorial on how to custom map certain properties in your Navisworks projects and use that for Quantification Workbook.